Well, welcome everyone. My name is Adrianne Stevens. I'm the Education Coordinator at the Canadian Cochrane Network and Center. Welcome to the RevMan Introduction to RevMan 5, Part 2, and today is October 22nd. I hope you're having a great day. We have folks joining us from across the globe here today. I'm glad that you've joined on with us and that this training meets your needs. I just want to take a moment to thank the funders of the Canadian Cochrane Network and Center, those being the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and 6 of the research institutes, as well as the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies and Health for their support during our current funding period. Thank you, CIHR and CADIF. As well, I'd like to thank the Pan American Health Organization, that is the regional office of the WHO across the Americas, for their support. They have very kindly provided us access to their Illuminate Live license, have opened up a room for us to be able to provide these webinars, so thank you very much, PAHO. And for those of you joining us from Canada, I just want to remind you that we currently have one-click access to the Cochrane Library through the CochraneLibrary.com. And what I thought I would do is I would just take a moment to upload that for you. And just take a look at the current issue. So in a moment, a dialog box should open up, and you should see the web tour option here that we have in Illuminate. If you see that, can you just send me a smiley face through the chat window? Okay, we have some folks who are able to see it. That's great. So here is issue 4, and I just want to bring to your attention one item, and that's new, this Cochrane Journal Club. I'm just going to click in here for a second. And as it says, join the discussion. So if you have access to the Cochrane Library from where you're joining, please join in. The example that's shown here is the Biologics for Rheumatoid Arthritis, a new overview of Cochrane reviews. And so you can listen to the podcast. They have a clinical summary. They have a profile of the author. You can view the presentation on the web, download the PowerPoint, and they have a discussion section as well. I'm just going to click here just for a moment, and what loads up are the clinical discussion points. Very nice feature that the Cochrane Library has been made available. So for example, you could get together with some colleagues to look at this on your own and say, okay, how confident are we in the results and conclusions? Can we use them? So just scrolling down here a little bit, yeah, so a nice feature that's been made available. So do join in if you are able to. One other item that I want to bring to your attention for those of you in Canada is we've launched a user survey of the Cochrane Library. So just give me one moment to load this up. Oh, it's not allowing me on because I've already taken it. So what I will do though is I will just send this into the chat room for you. Just one moment. I'll load up the slide. There it is, and it literally took me 20 or 30 seconds to fill it out. So I do encourage you to do this. So it's tiny.cc/Cochrane survey. I'm just going to throw that into the chat room, and do access that. We are using this information to help build the case for a sustained license within Canada. Well, I hope everyone is doing fine today. We're having a great day out of the nation's capital here in Ottawa, Canada. It's very nice to see the leaves change, the transition of seasons. So it's just beautiful out there right now. So why don't we carry on to today's session. And we're going to, and just okay to look over the format of the webinar. So I've split things up in multiple sections so you know. And so I will take questions following each section. So if you have a question, if you can just hold it until until I let you know, and I'll take questions, or you can send them through the chat room as we go along, and I will address them at each break. And if you do want to ask your question using the audio function, then just raise your hand. You see the hand icon located underneath the participant screen. I will let you know, and you can ask your question, and then I will let my audio go. You can activate your audio, ask your question, release it, and then I will come on and answer it. Okay, so to briefly outline part 2, we're going to look at tables within RevMan 5, data and analyses, figures, appendices, and then final steps before you're ready to submit your protocol or review. Okay, so as a brief overview, in terms of tables, RevMan 5 allows you to do tables in the main text of your review. For the characteristics of studies, it's mandatory that you use the table function. So you enter information on included studies, excluded studies, those awaiting classification, and ongoing studies. There are risk of bias tables, summary of findings tables, and additional tables. And I think the best way to look at that is if you actually see one in a RevMan 5 file. So just give me one moment, and I'm going to upload my Review Manager 5. Okay, so you probably see that your interface is changing a little bit. And so what I'll ask you to do is RevMan 5 should now appear as a floating dialog box in your view screen. So if you could just take a moment, I'm not sure that you can see everything that I'm seeing, and so I just want to make sure that you can. So if you can just take the width, you should be able to take your mouse and expand the width of your RevMan 5 viewing dialog box. I'll just give you a moment to do that. Once you've done that, you just send me a happy face through. Okay, great. So you can see what I'm seeing. Okay, that's great. Okay, wonderful. So here we are, we have the review, and I'm just going to go to the tables area and just bring up the included studies part. Okay, and so, and just for those of you who weren't able to join us for part 1, just to orient you a little bit to RevMan 5, on the left-hand side is your outline pane, so this is sort of your structure of your RevMan file. And the main items that you see are the headings that you cannot change, so they're fixed within RevMan. And then, as I've done, you can sort of expand or collapse as you need to see these subcomponents. And then on the right-hand side is your content pane. Okay, so just to briefly go over your included studies. So when you set up your RevMan 5 file, and we'll look at a blank one just a moment, just so you have a sense of what it looks like when you haven't added your information. But I wanted to just take a look at one that's actually been completed. I think it helps to sort of see what some folks have done. And so you see the fields that are available: methods, participants, interventions, outcomes, and notes. And it's as easy as just clicking in the white space and adding text. You can probably see my my cursor moving around here. So all I have to do is just sort of click in a part of the RevMan 5 file, and then I can just start typing. But this gives you a sense of what people have included in their methods or participants. So I quite like this one because they've added some fields to make the information quite clear, sort of in a structured format. And I'm just going to open up the properties wheel. Sorry, should come back up. There we are. And so in addition to the suggested headings or fixed headings that are provided within RevMan 5, you can add some user-defined ones as well. So I'm just going to add one as an example. I'm just going to add funding source. Just give me a moment to type this in. Okay, just like this, and then I'm going to select OK. And then it should come up. Okay, so here we are. There's the funding source one. And if I just sort of, I'm just having a bit of a problem today with the way that it's viewing. I don't seem to see my, my scroll bar on the right-hand side. I'm just going to move this around a little bit just to see. No, I don't seem to have it. Okay, I apologize for this. Okay, but maybe what I'll do is I'll just select another item here. Okay, so if you look down here, then you should be able to see, yes, that the funding source appears for each. So once you've selected it for one study, you scroll down and you see it automatically pops up for all the rest of them, which is quite a nice feature, and then you making sure that you're not missing that part. Okay. So that's pretty much the the characteristics of included studies in a nutshell. It's fairly straightforward. The next item that I want to show you is the risk of bias table. Okay, and here's a sample of one that is outlined. And just to give you a bit of background on the risk of bias, I don't want to do too much in terms of specific training on how to use the tool or how to complete it or that kind of thing. I just want to focus on the mechanics of completing one of these within RevMan 5. So the risk of bias, it's a new tool that is used now in Cochrane for Cochrane reviews. And the idea is to look at items that reflect the methodologic quality of a particular study. And instead of it being a checklist or a scale, which they don't recommend that you use, but it's more of a domain-based evaluation. And the idea behind it is that there are two parts for each item that you complete. One is a judgment, and the other one is a description. And so to look at the description part, this is where you describe what was reported. And the idea behind this is that that you're transparently indicating how you are making your particular judgment. And they suggest that absolutely, as you can see in this example, use verbatim quotes from reports or correspondence. This is the most, I guess, sort of clear and accurate way to communicate to your readers how you've made your judgment. It can include a summary of known facts or comments that you may have regarding a particular study. If there's other information that happens to influence your judgment, you're welcome to add that in there as well. And if you've obtained additional information from the authors, by all means include that in. An important thing to keep in mind is that when there's no information available, to state this explicitly within the description part. And then based on the description is where you make your judgment. And I'm just going to select my drop-down box so you have your choice of yes, no, or unclear. And the question always within the risk of bias table is framed such that when you say yes, you are indicating that for this particular item, it's at a low risk of bias. Unclear means either you're unable to make a judgment because the information's unclear, or it's an unknown risk of bias to you based on the information. And then, of course, if you're answering no, then you're indicating that it's a high risk of bias. Okay, so I'm just going to exit out of this particular one here. And I'm going to bring up my sample. Here we go. Okay, I can see my scroll bar now on the right-hand side. I was having problems seeing it with the last one. So this is an example of a blank file that I've created, and you can see the characteristics of included studies is blank. And so the risk of bias table, I'm just starting from scratch. You can see here they've left the allocation concealment one as the default setting, but when you click on this properties box, is where you can select the other items. And for some items, you answer them at the study level, so those being for adequate sequence generation. I'm just going to expand this out a bit. Should be able to expand this out. Oh, it's not allowing me. Okay. The first one is for adequate sequence generation. You would answer that at the study level. Allocation concealment, of course you would as well. And then selective reporting bias, you also answer at the study level. For items such as blinding or incomplete outcome data, you need to answer that on an outcome-by-outcome basis. And then for other items that you want to address regarding bias, or if you want to add another domain to be able to answer for each study, then it depends on the item, whether it's at a study level or if it's at an outcome level. So I'm just going to come back up here to the adequate sequence generation. So if you are including this in your risk of bias, then you just have to click on this activated box. And I'm just going to select OK just for a moment, and then you see that it opens up. And if I scroll down here, then you see it also appears for all of the remaining studies as well in your included studies list. OK, so to come back up, I'm just going to open up the properties box again. Okay. For blinding, you have to answer this at an outcome level. And so what you need to do before you can activate it at the top, and they've prompted you here that you need to add your outcome before you can activate it. So I'm just going to select Add, and all outcomes comes as a default item. I'm going to just add one more, and I just have to select it in the space. And I'm just going to put VAS score, for example, or if you want to look at, I'll just come back down to this other one if you want to address quality of life. Then this is how you do this. Once you've added your outcomes that you're going to look at, then you select Activate It, and then as you can see on the left-hand side that's checked. Okay, and then you do those for the remaining ones. If there was something that you want to add to your risk of bias table, then all I do is select Add, and then I select what the new item is, remembering of course that I have to answer the question so that yes means low risk of bias. So I'm just going to add free of inappropriate influence of funders as an example, since I added that item to the characteristics of included studies. Okay, and that's a study level item. And I'll just select OK, and here we are. And then you can go through, I'm just going to sort of type some text. You would add in your description, you would make your assessment, and then you can do that for each study. Okay, and another item to remember is that within your risk of bias table, if you've left the description field blank and the judgment is left as unclear, that particular item won't be published in the Cochrane library. And this can be a helpful feature for some reviews, and I think in particular EPOC reviews, where there could be a mix of study designs because of the type of interventions that they look like. RCTs may not be the appropriate design or not possible, and so they've looked at what other designs would be appropriate for answering those types of questions. And so there may be cases in which, yes, you need to leave it blank because you're just not going to answer for that type of study. However, the risk being that if you're really not meaning to leave it unfilled, that it may not come up as published. So in the published version, sorry. So just something for you to keep in mind when you're going through and completing this. Okay, I think that's probably it for the risk of bias table. I'm going to move on now just to look quickly at the excluded studies. And so when you have studies that you've indicated should be in the excluded studies list, and this is an item that I covered in the first session for those of you who weren't able to attend that one but are here now. And when you, and then I had sort of addressed that with the studies references, but now when we're looking at the table of excluded studies within RevMan, so in addition to providing, inputting the reference, the study ID, it prompts you to make sure that you include your reason for exclusion. And I'm just going to minimize this just for 1 second. I'm going to pull up the acupuncture review again. Okay, there we go. That's a better view of it now. And let's just go to the, sorry, it's just taking me a moment to upload this. So great, here are a few examples of excluded studies, and they've indicated for each study why it was excluded. And I quite like the way that they've sort of laid it out. They laid it out according to their PAHOs. So if it had to do with their patient population, if it had to do with their study design, their intervention, etc., which is a nice way to do it. Okay, so just returning to the training review. So that's excluded studies. As you can see below, for any studies that you've indicated that are awaiting classification for whatever reason, then you can fill in this information. So this is what automatically pops up within RevMan for those fields for you to complete. And if you've noticed as well, for where it's possible to add footnotes, then there's an italicized area where you can add footnotes. Ongoing studies, for any trials or studies that you've identified that may meet the inclusion in a future version of your review, then you can complete this area as well. And I'm just going to select the properties box again. You can add some additional headings if you wish. Okay, I'm just going to move on now to the summary of findings table. And I'm not going to talk about this in depth. That would be, I think, a topic of a future webinar, and we're planning one. The introduction to summary findings and grade is being held in December, so hopefully you're able to join on at that time. And we're also planning a Grade Pro one for into the new year for actually completing a summary of findings table. But what I thought I would do, so once you have it done and you're ready to import it, I just thought I'd quickly show you. And very nicely the IMS team has put together these wizards along the way that you can use within RevMan. So all I do is I select the Add Summary of Findings table box. You have a few options. We do recommend that people use Grade Pro when creating your Summary of Findings table. And I'm just going to select Next. And now I just find one, and I've sort of put together a sample one for today. So I select the file, I select Open, and you can preview what your Summary of Findings table looks like. And of course, this is straight addressing the main results of your review, and it appears after the abstract and the plain language summary, so before the background area of your review in the published version. I'm going to select Finish. Okay, and so here we are. It's just a sample one. So in the table, it outlines sort of what your PAHO is. All of the outcomes, you have up to 7 that you can list. Your 7 outcomes, and then information regarding sort of underlying risk within the population, what your corresponding risk is, treatment effect, number of participants in studies, what the quality of the evidence is according to the grade evaluation, and then a comments field. Okay, so that's how you add your Summary of Findings table. And then to move on to additional tables, this is where if you have data that don't go into your data analyses section, for example, if there are other tables you want to create within your review, it makes sense to do that. Then you can do that here. So I'll just click Add Table, and then you would just sort of add a title, and I'm just going to say outcome data for, and I'm just going to add a sample comparison. Okay, and then I'll select Next. And you have up to 10 columns that you can include and an unlimited number of rows. And they've set 10 so it looks nice in the published version. I'm going to keep the 3x3 for now. I'll select Finish. And then it's as easy as just selecting within the table and just typing your information. Okay, so I'm just going to pause here for now. That's the basic overview of tables. Are there any questions at this stage? You can either raise your hand or you can send them through the room. Okay, great. So I am just going to minimize that. I'm going to go on to Data and Analyses. And this is where the real fun part starts. We're going to do a meta-analysis together. Just to overview data analyses part, a few items to note. The information that's in this section is considered supplementary material. And so if there's a key force plot, etc., that you would like to make as a figure and reference it in your results section, then you need to create this under the figures section, which appears below the data and analyses in the outline pane. And when you do this, if you do want to make something as a figure, then you do need to link it within the text, and we'll do that near the end of today's session. Within the RevMan 5, they now have the inverse variance method available for dichotomous data. The graphs are updated in real time. It's quite a dynamic feature, and you'll see that in a moment when we go to create our meta-analysis. The analysis tools are integrated within RevMan 5. Sensitivity analysis is as easy as checking on a box, which is a very nice feature, and I'll show you that as well in a moment. They've improved the number precision within RevMan 5 as well, which is quite nice. So why don't we move along? I did add a sample sort of comparison within here because I wanted to show you the structure, the way you need to set it up within RevMan. So the first thing you need to do is set up your comparison. And so I put the example here, tramadol versus control. When I explode that, and then you indicate what your outcomes are, and I've just included a functionality index here as an example. Once you've indicated your outcomes, if you're going to look at any subgroups, then you would add subgroups at that point. I haven't for this particular one, so I'm just going to explode it, and then what you do is add all of your studies and then enter your data. So what I thought I'd do is, I've shown you the structure now, I thought we would do one as an example in this demonstration. So I'm going to add a comparison here, and the comparison that I'm going to use is tramadol versus placebo. And then I will select next. And you have a few options here. You can either do nothing, add an outcome, or add another comparison. I'm just going to select finish here quickly just to show you what it looks like when you stop at this stage. So it just gives you the structure of your comparison table. Now I'm going to select add outcome. And you have your options here, whether it's dichotomous data, continuous, whether you're going to use your observed minus expected and variance, whether you're using a generic inverse variance method, if you have hazard ratio data, let's say, for example, or if there are other data. And for this particular example, I'm going to use dichotomous data. I'm going to select next. Okay, and at this point you indicate what your outcome is. And so I'm just going to add what mine is, and it's people with at least moderate improvement of pain. Okay, and be as explicit as possible when you're completing this. And so rather than just leaving it as experimental, I'm going to add tramadol, and then I'm going to add placebo. Okay, and these are the headings for when you have your data shown within your forest plot output. I will select next, and here's where you select what your statistical method is, what your analysis model is, and what your effects measure is. So I'm just going to leave the Mendel-Hansel with fixed effect, and I will select risk ratio, and then I will click next. Before I do, you can see there are a few items that are grayed out, and those are items that are not available according to your data type, your outcome type, which makes sense. For example, I'm not using continuous data, and so I wouldn't have access to mean difference or standardized mean difference. Okay. Now I will select next. At this point, you can edit your outcome if you need to. You can add your subgroup, add your study data, or add another comparison. Okay, I'm just going to add my study data, select finish. Next pops up the dialog box where I add my studies. So I'm going to select all of these, and all I'm doing is holding down the control command, and as I'm clicking, and then I'll select finish. Okay, and so here we are. I'm just going to just format the view a little bit here. Okay, and so for those of you who have done meta-analyses or are familiar with this in the past, here is the standard view that we have within RevMan. So you can see the studies, your tramadol, your placebo, so the two comparison groups. Then you add your people with events, total number of people within each group. And then as we go along, as you'll see, when we enter the data, then some of the other information will fill in. At this point, do I have a few volunteers who would like to help me conduct this meta-analysis? And it's as easy as me giving you control of my RevMan application, and then I would just walk you through adding in the data. Is there anyone out there who would like to join on with me? You can raise your hand, or you can send me a message through. Okay, great. So Faiz, I'm going to give you control, and then I'm going to do is that if I only have two people, maybe I'll have you do 2 studies, and then I'll have Rachel do another 2. Okay, so I'm going to give you control, and now you can just take your mouse, you move your mouse around. Perfect. Okay, so so you're in the events for the MQ trial, so you just type in 54. So we have 54 people at the event of a total of 91. Okay, and then in the placebo group, 34. Okay, 71. Now take your mouse and select the next row down. Okay, so just pause just for a second. So what you can see is the data that you've just entered has now appeared within the draft forest plot. So it's a nice dynamic feature. You can sort of see it build as you're going along. Okay, so on to Fleischmann. 28, 62, 18 and 64. Excellent. So select the next row down, somewhere in one of the white spaces there. Great. And then you've added the next one. Thank you so much. Why don't we give applause to Faiz for helping us out here. Thank you very much. Actually, you can use your emoticons as we're going along in the session. Please feel free to do so. Excellent. Okay. Rachel, you are next. So I'm going to give you control. Okay, so you should be able to take your mouse, go to Malone. Perfect. Okay, so add in 66, then 85, 67, and then 112. Again, select the row below somewhere, and you see that data pop up. Great. 159, 197, 62, and 111. Okay, now just click somewhere else in the white space, or there. Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much. Why don't we give another round of applause? All right. Thank you very much for joining in. So it's as simple as that. And as you saw, it updates the meta-analysis sort of as we go along. Another nice feature that RevMan 5 has is in this view you can see the data look quite small based on the way that the scale is. And what I'm going to do is you can see at the bottom, if you can see my cursor, I'm just going to expand it out. Okay, and then you can view things a little bit better. What you wouldn't have been able to have seen in the smaller view is that in the second trial, you can actually see that the confidence interval went beyond beyond this line of 1, which indicates no effect. But when you explode it out, when you expand it out, you can see the data a bit better now. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to select up here where it says forest plot, and when I click on this, this is where you get that final view that you're used to seeing for those of you who are familiar. Where you see each study, you see the data for each one, you see your final meta-analysis, you see your diamond there. When you look at your information for heterogeneity and your test for overall effect, you see that there as well. At this point, if you want to, then you can click it and say, yes, I want to add it as a figure. I'm just going to, I'm not going to do that for right now. I thought we would do that in the figures section. I am going to just cancel it for a second because I mentioned about sensitivity analysis. So let's say you've predefined an item that you want to look at sensitivity analysis for, and it makes sense to do so. Then all you would do is you would just deselect a study. I'm just going to deselect MKey 2004, as you can see over here in this column. Okay, you see that the data disappear. I'm just going to pull up the forest plot. Okay, you can see that even though the actual data are there, its contribution to the meta-analysis is not shown. And this is also confirmed when you look at the degrees of freedom, which is K-1, and so you see their degrees of freedom are 2, which indicates there were 3 studies included in the analysis. So that's how you would do a sensitivity analysis. I'm just going to cancel this back out. Add in the M key. Now what's helpful to do at this stage is to look at this and say, okay, does this make sense? Maybe I'll just open back up the forest plot. Okay, now because I sort of pulled this together, I'm familiar with the data. When I look at this, I can say, you know what, it doesn't make sense because the data that were included in the studies, well, it favors tramadol. It favors the experimental arm, and all the data here is showing that it favors control. And what's happening here is because I'm looking at a beneficial outcome. Just to remind you, we're looking at improvement of pain, and you would expect that your relative risk then would be greater than 1 when it's favoring your experimental. So what I need to do here is I need to switch the labels on my axes. So I am just going to just cancel this out. If I go to this properties box here, this is where if you've gone through and you're entering your data and you realize, oh, I made a mistake, I have a risk ratio instead of odds ratio. This is where you could change it if you needed to, rather than going back through all the other steps. Some details, you know, if you want makes sense to change your confidence interval for some reason. If they have an option of swapping your event to non-event for dichotomous data, there are some options there. I'm just going to go to graph, and this is where I would change the left should actually say placebo, and the right should, so I'm just going to select apply. And so if we look over at the meta-analysis while I'm doing this, you should see, great, it's saying placebo, so it's in the right spot where I want it to be. And I'm just going to say tramadol there, and again, I'll just select OK. So great, so now it's appearing the way it should be. The data makes sense, great. So we're ready. Okay, that is sort of what I wanted to show you in a nutshell. Are there any questions in terms of functionality information regarding this at this point? Okay, Fayez, why don't you go ahead? I'm going to release my audio and you can activate yours. Fayez, I'm just going to remind you to select your audio button at the bottom left-hand side of the screen so that we can hear you. Go ahead. Fayez, I'm sorry, we don't seem to be able to hear you. How about if you type in your information through the chat window? Okay, and while we're waiting for the question to come through, I'm just going to select the other information that I had put in, the other meta-analysis, just to show you what continuous data look like. Okay, so you have your means, your standard deviation, your total number of patients, and then this is what the forest plot looks like. Okay, so as questions come through, you're wondering how you add multiple comparisons. Okay, so I'm going to come back up to the data analyses. And so this should appear on your screen now. And all I do is I select Add Comparison. Okay, so I'm just going to add another one. Tramadol versus, and I'm just going to say, I'm just going to say Intervention B, just as an example, okay? And then I select Next or Finish, and then that's how another one should come up. So I'm just going to come up here, great. So you can see through the three comparisons. You see tramadol versus placebo versus control versus Intervention B. Okay, I hope that answers your question. I'm going to move on to Krista. Krista, I'm going to release my audio and you can activate yours. Go ahead. Okay, she doesn't have her microphone, so she's going to type her information through. That is no problem, and do know that you have that option if you wish to. Okay, so I'm just going to come back up here to the dichotomous data. Just bring this back up on the screen. Okay, in the forest plot, you changed the heading from outcome or subgroup to something of your choosing. Oh, can you change the heading from outcome? I'm not sure what you mean. Can you change the heading? Oh, in the table itself. Let me just open up study or subgroup. Okay, that's fine. I think I know what you mean, where it says outcome or subgroup and then studies and then participants. Is that what you mean? Can you just send me a smiley face through if that's what you mean? I'm just going to click on this properties box. I don't believe you can. Okay, I don't believe you can. No, I believe that those are all fixed. And so if it doesn't make sense to show your data this way, if you're doing a meta-analysis, this is pretty much how you have to show your information. If it makes sense to show your data another way and you're not doing a meta-analysis, then I suggest that you go and create an additional table. So let me just come back up to the tables, and this is where you would do that. You would create an additional table and add your information. Okay? Great. So if there are no other questions, then maybe I will move on. Does that answer your question, Krista? Maybe I just want to verify that before we move on. Send a smiley face through if it answers your question. Okay, perfect. Okay, great. So why don't we move on to figures. Oh, there's another question. Fayez, go ahead and type it through the chat room for us. That would be great. And I will just come back to this in meta-analysis so we can just sort of bring this up on the screen. Okay, why don't you go ahead and type your information through the chat room, Fayez. And if you don't have a question, just let me know. Can we compare 4 different medications head-to-head? No, they're all done in dual comparison. So if it makes sense to, if you have multiple comparisons, then you need to keep them as just 1 versus 2. Okay? Great. So why don't we move on? Okay, you're welcome. No problem at all. So we will move on to figures. Okay, and this is where we will add our meta-analysis figure. So I just select Add Figure, and at this point you can do, oh, I didn't show you the funnel plot. Just one moment. Let me go back, and I will show you a funnel plot. Sorry, I forgot to do this. Just sort of come back to the data. The funnel plot figure is right here. If you can see my cursor. Of course, there are only a few studies to do this, but if it made sense for you to do a funnel plot and you wish to, then this is how it appears. And again, you can save that as a figure from there. Okay, so I will just collapse the data in Analyses, go back to Figures, select the wizard again. You can create a risk of bias graph or risk of bias summary, and there are a couple of samples of those within Chapter 8 of the handbook if you wanted to take a look at those. For the purposes of today's demonstration, I will add forest plot. I will select Next, and I will select the meta-analysis that we conducted together. Select Next. This is what appears as a default caption. You can change it if you wish. I quite like what they've put as the default, so I will select Finish. And here it appears as a figure. As I mentioned, for figures, you do need to reference them. So I am just going to come back up to I will select the main text over here on the left. I'm just going to click on Results. And then Effects of Intervention. I added a little bit of text before our session today. Okay, and what you can do is you can link to the figure, and I'm going to select. So all I did was I selected. Sorry, I might have done that a little quickly. Let me start again. I just select this link icon near the top of the screen. I select Figure, Figure 1 Analysis. I can select OK. And the other thing that we can do is we can insert the analysis results. So I'm just going to Format, Insert Analysis Results. I'm selecting the meta-analysis that we can conduct it together, and you can see in the dialog box it previews your data. The nice thing about this is that you can avoid any typographic errors by using this feature. So I'm just going to select OK. So here appears the statistical results of the meta-analysis, and then the figure 1, as you can see, appears in blue. It's underscored, and once your review is published with the Cochrane Library, that becomes a hyperlink down to the figure below. Okay, so I am just going to I collapse that main text. I know you can't see everything that I can see on my screen, so I want to make sure that you can see everything. And that's the figures part done, and then I will come down to the appendices. And the appendices part is a place where you can add supplementary material. I believe they recommend in the handbook that you include your full search strategy for Medline, for example, within the main text part of your review. But for the additional databases that you search, for example, Embase, then you can add your full search strategy here. So if you just give me one moment, I'm just going to select, I'm down at the bottom of the screen, I'm going to select Add Appendix, and I'm going to just type in Embase, Search Strategy, select Finish, sorry, so that appears there. And simply within this white box, all you need to do is just copy and paste some text. So I'm just going to upload a little bit of text here, and I'm just going to copy this. Go back to my RevMan, and I will paste it, and there you go. There you just have to copy and paste the information in, and that's the way that you can add your appendices. Okay. Are there any questions up to this point? Okay. Great. So what I'm going to cover now are the final steps that you need to do before you are finished with your file. So one thing that you need to do is you need to validate your review, and the feature within RevMan for this is to ensure that you don't have any important errors for your review or your protocol when you go to submit it to the Cochrane library. And if any errors do appear when you do this validation check, you won't actually be able to publish it on the Cochrane library. The system won't allow you to do it. And so this validation feature, they have, if you go to the top here where you see this OK and a checkbox, if I select that, then what it does is it allows the validation feature to appear as you're doing the review. So if you notice when I click that on the left-hand side, you can see that the headings are underlined either in red or in blue. When a section is underlined in red, that means that there's a validation error, and it's an error important enough that won't allow you to be published, your review or protocol to be published to the Cochrane library. Anything that's underscored in blue means it's a validation warning, and they would prefer that you correct those, but it's not compulsory to correct it when you're going to publish it on the Cochrane library. So this gives you a snapshot view of what may be wrong with your review, items you need to fix, that is, before you publish it. What you can do is you can obtain a detailed report that goes through exactly what the issues are. So if I select File, and if I select Reports, and select Validation Reports, then this appears. So for each section, it tells you what the issue is and then the description. So for example, in my dates area, I've not indicated what my assesses up to date is for my file. And therefore I need to complete that. And so the report separates the errors, and if I scroll down from the warnings. Okay, so then you can print this out, you can save it, and you can go through each item to make sure that what you need to correct is corrected before you submit it for editorial approval. The next item that you need to be aware of is under the reports is your license for publication form. Okay, so when you're ready to publish your review, all your co-authors need to sign this, so you can print this out and have folks sign it. So just to just very briefly go through the items here, gives you a sense of what you need to look at. I'll select OK. Okay, so once you're done your file, then I remind you that that you need to check your file back in. If it's ready for editorial approval, then during the check-in phase, you would select that particular item so the editorial team knows that it's ready for them to do their part. And while it's out for editorial approval, you cannot access your file during that time. So it is locked for you to be able to check it back out and really sort of the permission set for the editorial team to look at it at that point. And for those of you who are curious, the check-in, check-out process I covered in session 1 if you weren't able to join us at that time. Okay. So if there aren't any more questions, I'll just give you a minute if you want to raise your hand or send something through the chat room. Then I will close this part. Okay, it doesn't look as though there are any more questions. Before we do that, I just want to bring your attention to one thing. Since we have a few minutes, just to come back here, when we look at some of these items, and maybe it's best viewed with the review that's been completed. So just to make you aware, the way that this file is set up within RevMan is not necessarily the way that it's published on the Cochrane library. So for example, when you look at your excluded studies, each appears sort of as its own separate table. But when you look at it on the Cochrane Library, it does sort of look different. So the formatting will be a little bit different, just so that you know. And as I mentioned, even though the Summary of Findings table appears here under the Tables section, in the published version of your review, your main SOF table will actually appear before the background section. Okay. So great. I will just release the application sharing. So just give me one moment. And it should come back to the whiteboard. Is this where everybody is? Can you just send me a smiling face through the participant window if that's where you are? Okay, great, wonderful. So I will just go ahead to my last final few slides. Okay, and to remind you, there is a help file within RevMan 5. This is just a screenshot of it. There you can access the handbook, which is the second item down, which is a really great feature. If there's a quick thing you just want to check on, you wouldn't quite remember how to complete that item in the risk of bias table, for example, or you want a little bit of guidance in terms of summary of findings, then you can access the handbook. There is a tutorial. I'll just show you where I'm pointing to here. So if you can see my hand, there is a tutorial. So even though this is today was a bit more sort of an overview of the features and how to work with RevMan 5, and if you're not at a stage where you're ready to work with a review, or if you're still at the title stage in terms of registering one with a Cochrane review group, then if you want some actual hands-on experience, then you can access the tutorial. That's the PDF guide that's available there. When you download RevMan 5 from the IMS site, there is a tutorial file, a sample RevMan file that goes hand in hand with this PDF, and you can sort of step-by-step work through some of the features. There are also links to items on the internet. So for example, if you want to access the browsable version on the internet, you can do that. Important to note is the style guide to make sure that when you're completing your review that you're doing it in accordance to the style recommendations that the Cochrane collaboration wishes you to do that to ensure consistency across reviews. If you want a direct link into the RevMan site, you can go there, make a suggestion, etc. So that's the help file. And of course, you can always contact your managing editor, if you have any specific questions regarding your review. And you can also access the RevMan site at ims.cochrane.org. I do want to acknowledge a few of my colleagues who, without their work, today's presentation would not be possible. Those being Liz Dooley, Veronica Pitt, and Elizabeth PNR, who actually created all the training materials for the in-person and webinar RevMan 5 sessions. So thank you to those folks. We value your input, so please complete our evaluation form, and in a few minutes I will send that through the room for you. And when you receive it, just complete it, save it to your desktop, and email it to ccnc-iph@uottawa.ca, and that email address is also available on the evaluation form as well for you to refer to. And just a reminder for those of you in Canada to ensure that you use the Cochrane Library whenever you wish, daily even, and to let your colleagues know that it's also available and to show them how to use the Cochrane Library. Well, thank you very much. I will just pause a moment to see if there are any questions. One came through. I joined late today due to technical difficulty. Was the session recorded? Yes, it is in fact recorded. So I will let you know how you can access those. I will send an email to you after the session. No problem at all. You're welcome. Well, thank you very much for joining. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, and thanks for participating in the interactive components. I hope you've enjoyed Illuminate. I've certainly enjoyed all the different features that you can use to be able to produce this webinar. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again. Bye for now.